Good morning. Welcome to Faith on Hill's online Sunday morning service. We gather together every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m., both online and in person. Online, we're at faithonhill.com for our live stream. You can search Faith on Hill Church on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts for all of our online content. And you can follow us at Faith on Hill on social media. We gather on Sunday mornings at 10:30 a.m. in person at our building on Hill Road, where we meet. We have kids' church. We gather together for worship and song and prayer. We study God's word together, and then we scatter out throughout the week in small groups, both in person and online, in people's homes and at different locations. And you can email smallgroups at faithonhill.com for more information. We're going to continue our study in the book of Joshua, and we'll be looking at the book of Joshua, chapter 22. Joshua chapter 22, verse 1 says, "Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, 'You have done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded. For a long time now, to this very day, you have not deserted your fellow Israelites, but have carried out the mission of the Lord your God that he gave you. And now that the Lord your God has given them rest as he promised, return to your homes in the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan.'" So these 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, years earlier, they had gotten to the edge of the promised land when Moses was still alive and leading the people of Israel. And as they stood there within sight of the promised land, these 2.5 tribes and their leaders said to Moses, "Moses, we like it here. We want to stay here. And if you will just give us this land here, then we will come with you. We are not abandoning you. We are still fully part of Israel. This is our team. This is our family. We will come with you. We will send our fighting men with you, and we will go and take the rest of the land that God has given us. But this is where we'd like to stay. It suits us. There's just different people like different places, right? Some people like the high desert. Some people like, that rainy Western Oregon, Western Washington, Pacific Coast lifestyle. Some people like it down in, Key West. Everybody has different places that they like. Some people like winter, some people like summer. And for whatever reason, they said, hey, we like it here. And some people have really tried to spiritualize the reasoning for why they wanted to stay. And what some people like to do is they like to sort of make an allegory for these 2.5 tribes did not cross the Jordan River. They did not enter into the promised land. And in this sort of picture that is painted, it's sort of metaphor for people who believe in God, have faith in Jesus, but never seem to want to fully commit, never seem to want to fully enter into that promised land, that victorious life. A life full of the Holy Spirit of God, a life full of love and joy and peace and power, a life lived in the blessings of Christ. And maybe that's true. It has been certainly noted, and we will take a note of this later in this Bible study, that these 2.5 tribes were some of the first to be conquered, some of the first to fall away, some of the first to be split off from the rest of Israel. I see the analogy. I see it played out. Yet I am also hesitant to make that sort of analogy when it's not abundantly clear in the scripture itself, and Jesus nor the apostles made such a blatant analogy in the New Testament. So, you can also say that the boundaries for the land God gave the people of Israel arguably included this land where Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh chose to stay. You could make that argument. So, They wanted to stay there, but they held true to their agreement. And that's what Joshua is commending them for. He said, hey, Moses gave you this land. You asked for it. Moses gave it to you. You made a promise that you would come into the promised land, cross the Jordan with us, and you've done that. Everything I've asked you've done. You have held true to your word. So he is commending them. He is giving them, every praise and all that kind of stuff. Good for you. And he says, hey, you have not deserted your fellow Israelites. You have carried out the mission the Lord your God gave you. And now that the Lord your God has given them rest, that's the rest of Israel, he says, return to your homes in the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. But, verse 5, be very careful to keep the commandments and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him and to keep his commands, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Then Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their homes. To the half-tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given the land of Bashan. To the other half-tribe, Joshua had gave the land west of the Jordan along to their fellow Israelites. When Joshua sent them home, he blessed them, saying, return to your homes with your great wealth, with large herds of livestock, silver, gold, bronze, and iron, great quantities of clothing, and divide the plunder from your enemies with your fellow Israelites. So he's saying to the fighting men, this is not for you to go home and enrich yourself, but to go home and to spread this out among the full group of your people. It's not for you who fought in the battle to say, well, I fought in this, therefore it's mine. I deserve this, and those who didn't fight don't. Go home and spread this great wealth out among young and old, among these 2.5 tribes. Well, that sounds like socialism. God's not interested in your politics. That's what Joshua said to do. So then Joshua blessed them, sent them away. Verse 9, the Reubenites, the Gadites, the half-tribe of Manasseh left the Israelites at Shiloh in Canaan and returned to Gilead, their own land which they had acquired in accordance with the command that the Lord gave through Moses. Now, when they came to Gileath, near the Jordan, in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. And when the Israelites heard that they had built an altar on the border of Canaan at Gileath, near the Jordan on the Israelite side, the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. Now, to us, we might say, whoa, hang on here. There is something that we have missed, because obviously this is a big deal. If all of the other tribes of Israel are about to go to war over this imposing altar, something happened. This means something that we do not yet understand. And maybe everyone back there would have understand, but we, sitting here, 2024 in Oregon, we don't get it. What do you do when you come across that? You're studying the Bible, you're reading the Bible, you're trying to understand, and you go, wait, what's happening here? Sometimes you just got to keep reading, and the Bible will explain itself. The book of Daniel is like this. The book of the Revelation is like this. Something crazy will happen. Daniel sees a vision of these beasts running all over the world, and he's like, what is that? And then God explains it. John, the apostle, sees a vision of some crazy thing happening in the heavens or on the earth. And then somebody will come up to him and says, hey, did you see that? And he goes, yeah. Did you understand that? He says, nope. And hey, would you like me to explain it to you? Yes, please. And then it's explained. So sometimes you just got to keep reading. Sometimes it's not explained, and we have in faith say, well, the Lord has a reason for putting that in there, even if we don't understand. Sometimes it's only understood if you understand a cultural context or a history that is lost to us, and that is where commentaries and study resources are helpful, and they're not hard to find. EnduringWord.com, StudyLight, as in L-I-G-H-T, StudyLight.org, BlueLetterBible.com. I've said before, I'll say it again, I will buy anyone a copy of Haley's Bible Handbook. You just got to ask. There are great Bible resources out there. But let's keep reading and see what's going on. Why is it that all the rest of Israel is going to go to war over this altar when they have just blessed everybody, said, hey, you guys did great. You did everything we asked. Thank you. Go home. Be at peace. Oh, no, now we're going to fight. What's happened? So the Israelites sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, to the land of Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and with them they sent 10 of the chief men, one from each of the tribes of Israel, each of them the head of the family division among the Israelite clans. And they went to Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and they said to them, the whole assembly of the Lord says, how could you break faith with the God of Israel like this? How could you turn away from the Lord and build yourself an altar in rebellion against him now? Was not the sin of Peor enough for us? Up to this very day, we have not cleansed ourselves from that sin, even though a plague fell on the community of the Lord, and you are now turning away from the Lord? They go on. If you rebel against the Lord today, tomorrow he will be angry with the whole community of Israel. If the land you possess is defiled, come over to the Lord's land where the Lord's tabernacle stands and share the land with us. But do not rebel against the Lord our God. When Achan, the son of Zerah, was unfaithful in regard to the devoted things, did not the wrath come on the whole community of Israel? He was not the only one who died for his sin. Then Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the clans of Israel, the mighty one, God, the Lord. The mighty one, God, the Lord. He knows, and let Israel know. If this has been in rebellion or disobedience to the Lord, do not spare us this day. If we have built our own altar to turn away from the Lord, or to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings, or to sacrifice fellowship offerings on it, may the Lord himself call us to account. No, we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you, the Reubenites and Gadites, and you have no share in the Lord. And your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord. And that is why we said, let us get ready and build an altar, but not for burnt offerings or sacrifices. On the contrary, it is a witness between us and you and the generations that follow, that we will worship the Lord at his sanctuary with burnt offerings, sacrifices, and fellowships. And in the future, your descendants will not be able to say to ours that you have no share in the Lord. And we say, if they ever say to us or our descendants, and then we will answer, look at this replica of the Lord's altar, which our ancestors built, not for burnt offerings or sacrifices, but as a witnesses between us and you. Far be it from us to rebel against the Lord and to turn away from him by burning an altar for burnt offerings, grain offerings, sacrifices, other than the altar of the Lord our God that stands before his tabernacle. Okay, now we have a little more context. Here's what's going on. They leave, and then the first thing they do is build this massive, big, imposing altar that looks exactly like the one at the tabernacle. You see, it was still okay to put up these sort of quick makeshift altars for ceremonial prayer and worship. You see this other places in the scripture. But this was exactly like the one in the tabernacle. And they thought, oh, these guys have gone off. Now that they have got all the spoils and plunder from the land, and now they're going off to set up their own little kingdom, their own tribe, and they are going to rebel against God, and they're going to set up their own systems of worship. And you see, who did they send? They sent Phinehas, the son of the high priest, and they sent with him a senior leader of each of the other tribes of Israel. These are all people that have power and authority both to listen and to speak. If these guys hear something and then they come back and report it to the assembly of Israel, they have the authority to say, this is what we heard, and it won't be questioned. But they also have the authority to speak on behalf of the assembly of Israel to these 2.5 tribes and say, hey, this is what's going on, and this is what we need from you. And this is the issue. They believe that the 2.5 tribes have gone home and started a rebellion against God and have broken away from Israel. And they believe that they basically put up their flag and said, we're our own group now. We're not going to come to Shiloh, to the tabernacle to worship. We're going to worship here in our land. We don't need you anymore. And then they reference the judgment that God did in Peor. Peor references an incident that happened back in the book of Numbers when the people of Israel fell into the worship of idols, specifically through sexual immorality. It's interesting that pagan worship almost universally has a sexual component to it. Whether it's worship in ancient Babylon, worship among the Canaanites, worship among the Greeks and the Romans, pagan worship almost universally has a sexual element to it. And when they say we still have not fully cleansed ourselves of the sin of Peor, I think what they're saying is there was STDs, venereal disease, that was still seen among the people of Israel that they had contracted because those men had gone and slept with they were politely called temple prostitutes, but really were just sex slaves, human trafficked. And as they slept with them, contracted these diseases, brought them back, spread through the people of Israel. I remember there's a movie with Meryl Streep. I forget the name of the movie, but it was about this very famous, wealthy woman back at the early 1900s, and she loved to sing, but she was a terrible, terrible singer. And she also had syphilis. And there's a scene in the movie, and it was hushed up and it was quiet that she had this disease, and the doctor examines her, and he said, when did you contract syphilis? And she said, on my wedding night. Because you see, my husband had been fooling around and he had it and I didn't know, and our first night together, I contracted this disease, having no idea. And that's kind of what happened. These guys went out, fooled around, came back, spread it to their wives, and then spread around. And then if they were fooling around themselves, because it's not unthinkable to think that they themselves were fooling around with others in the camp of Israel, it began to spread around. And then all of a sudden they're saying, hey, we're still dealing with, generation later, we are still dealing with the ramifications of this sin. And then they reference something that happened in their own generation that we studied a few weeks ago, this guy Achan, who rebelled against God in secret, took things that he wasn't supposed to take, and there was a consequence that affected the whole community. Because what can happen is one person can do something and it can go off the rails and then affect the whole community. So they're pleading with them, hey, if your land is defiled, meaning if there's idol worship, if there's immorality in your land, if there are people that you have not, displaced as God wanted you to, and those people have led you astray, they're saying, hey, come back with us. We'll find room for you here. We'll redistribute the land here so that you can fit and you can be here with us. And we want you to be connected with us. This is actually an incredibly gracious moment where they're pleading with them, do not rebel as our forefathers did. Do not rebel as our contemporaries did. We've seen what happens if you do, but also there's grace and mercy. Hey, we will mess up. We've just established where everybody's allotted and everybody's going, but we will mess up that whole system. We just built the house. We will tear it all down and rebuild it so there is room for you if that's what you need. What do you need so that you can live in the blessings of God? And they respond, hey, no, this wasn't about that. We just wanted this up here as a reminder to future generations that we serve the same God. And if we ever, our children ever try to cross the Jordan and they're turned back, if your descendants ever say that they have no share in the tabernacle and the worship of God, this is a reminder between us. That's what they say. It says in verse 30 that when Phinehas and the priests and the leaders of the community, the heads of the clans of the Israelites, heard what Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh had to say, it says they were pleased. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, said to Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, today we know that the Lord is with us because you have not been unfaithful to the Lord in this matter. Now you have rescued the Israelites from the Lord's hand. And then Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, and the leaders returned to Canaan from their meeting with the Reubenites and the Gadites in Gilead and reported this to the Israelites. And they were glad to hear the report, and they praised God. And they talked no more about going to war against them to devastate the country where the Reubenites and the Gadites lived. And the Reubenites and the Gadites gave the altar this name, a witness between us, that is, the Lord is God. Now, is that really why the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh put up that altar? We don't know. It could be. That's certainly the story they told. I've read over this story several times. You know, when I start a new book of the Bible, I sort of do a big overview read, and then, you know, as we get to different sections of that book, I'll do another overview read, and then when we come to that approaching week, I'll do, start to get more in-depth. And then if there's certain, as I do the first overview read, I'll know that there's certain maybe more controversial or more intense section of that book, and so maybe that gets a little more attention ahead of time. I've read over this passage several times in the last couple months. This is my own opinion. I think that the author is leaving it a little bit vague. We're not 100% sure. Certainly, history tells us that these were the three tribes that were the first to be taken into idolatry and the first to be captured away by invasions and conquerors. That's certainly true. It's possible that everything that the Israelites were saying was right, and that they said, no. And then, they just said the story they needed to say. That's possible. It's also possible that the Israelites were right, they were just early. Meaning that Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh meant what they said. That was true. And what the Israelites were seeing was flaws in the system that would come home to roost later. These systems and structures, that it was always going to kind of end up this way. When you have something like that, when you're isolated, when you're away from the community of faith, it's not surprising that that's the way things go. Sometimes it's like, you know what? That's kind of the trajectory you were on, and sometimes it might take years for it to play out. In some cases, it might take a generation for it to play out. But it's not surprising that that's the trajectory when things go a certain way, because the system was designed for that to happen. Some of the debates we've had as a group of churches, as a denomination, over the last several years, and the discussions and the dialogues we've had. I remember I was in a conversation with one of sort of our elder statesmen, somebody who'd been around a long time. And I said, well, this was always going to go this way. And they said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, look at the original bylaws for our denomination that were established. They didn't want this, and this to happen. And so there was always going to come a point where we were going to have to cross the bridge of what happens when these three big things that they did not want to have happen And then somebody says, well, all right, then we're going to go this way, and we don't have any of those structures in place. That's the result, because the system was designed for it to eventually go that way. So, my take on this is that you can see the people of Israel recognized, hey, our fathers and our grandfathers rebelled against God, and we see something similar happening to you, and we don't want to see that come down on us. The people of Israel recognized in our own day, we saw what happened with Achan and others like him, and we don't want to see that happen to you, and we don't want to see that come down on us. You can also see where Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh hadn't realized that the way that they were doing things, you know what? They should have explained what they were doing. Let's just be honest. I know how I look. I know how I look. And I know that there are people in this community that a middle-aged white guy with a beard who likes to wear flannel shirts, they have already decided who I am and how I think and what I'm all about before I've ever said a word. And I have to work twice as hard to show them who I am, to let Jesus be seen in me. That awareness is something I think Christians need to have. We don't have a good reputation in this community. We don't. And it's something to be aware of. Some of that is unfair? Yes. Some of that is untrue? Absolutely. Some of that is hypocritical? Oh, you betcha. But it's real, and perception is reality. And if you are these guys who decided to live apart from everybody else, if you're these guys who go away and then do this thing without telling anybody, maybe you should key in on this idea that, you had to over-communicate what was going on. There's trust and relationship that has to be built up. And so I see some really positive things here. That Israel, they had a quick reaction, but then they paused, they went and they listened. That's good. I also appreciate that the 2.5 tribes had a legitimate answer. That's good. The things to learn from is that nobody wanted to deal with the deeper root systems that would eventually come back to bite everybody. Not good. Also, Gad and Reuben and the half-tribe of Manasseh here are given a warning. And they didn't seem to want to listen. Not good. All of this kind of is wrapping up the book of Joshua. All of this is kind of wrapping up the story of Joshua. Joshua sends these guys on this way. He commends them. He says, you have kept your word. You have been faithful to God. That's all good. You've been faithful to your fellow Israelites. That's all good. But then you see how lack of communication, how a broken system, how fair or unfair, how somebody is just going to inherently be perceived in the community, all come to a head, and stuff has to get dealt with. And what I appreciate is that the Israelites listened. I appreciate that instead of taking their ball and going home, Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they engaged and they responded and they had the hard conversations. I appreciate that they just didn't say, how dare you say that? No, they said, hey, I get what you're saying. I can see how this looks. This is where we were coming from. Oh, okay. This is where we were coming from. Okay, gotcha. And there was a dialogue happening. As the church has different generations, we'll have these kind of issues. As the church has different cultures, we'll have these kind of issues. As the church has different points of view, we will have these kind of issues. And as the church is increasingly a minority and increasingly an other in our own community, we will have these kind of issues with the world around us, and we will have to work harder to explain. It won't be as easy as it used to be. But that's the world that we live in. That's the day that we have been called to bring Jesus to. And so we can take some lessons and say, hey, you know what? We can work harder because that's just what we got to do. And we can be aware that we may have good intentions and it's going to be mistaken and there's nothing we can do about it, but we can be aware of it and try to minimize or mitigate. And where we are misunderstood or mistaken, how can we say, hey, here's what we're about, here's where we're going. I do think that God in his grace can pass over, can bridge these sort of misunderstandings, these divides, these disagreements. If you have any questions, don't agree with something I said, didn't understand something I said something stupid, or you just want to check in, you can email me, adam@faithonhill.com. If you're wondering what visiting on a Sunday morning would be like, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to answer any questions. And I want you to know that no matter what, God knows who you are. God cares about you. And in all of these debates and big things that are going on, just like they're going on then and they're going on now, that God cares about who you are and what's going on in your world. And he is just one prayer away. And Jesus is listening and ready to work in your world. God bless you. We'll see you next Sunday.